If you're not making anything except paperwork, if it's real people making things that you heard, if your office is a broom closet somewhere in the state of Texas, we'll all line up in a big row to punch your solar plexus and destroy, 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 destroy.
Hello, and welcome to the Tech Dirt Podcast. Once again, I am Mike Masnick. Last week, we discussed the problems with the patent system with Dennis Yang and Hirsch Reddy. Hirsch, who is actually a patent attorney, agrees with me that the system is really, really broken, and as we discussed, many other patent attorneys feel that way too, though not many of them will admit so publicly. This week, we discuss if the system is salvageable, and if so, how to possibly fix it. There are reasonable arguments to be made that we'd be better off without a patent system at all. Others argue that maybe we just need a patent system for a few key areas, such as pharmaceuticals. That's one that I also disagree with, but we may do that in a future podcast. There's a big attempt at patent reform happening right now in Congress, which focuses specifically on court reform, targeting patent trolls, basically making it potentially more expensive for patent trolls. These trolls rely on the fact that even defending against a completely bogus patent in court would likely cost upwards of $1 million, and they use that to demand settlement figures in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, correctly assuming that many companies know it's going to be cheaper to settle than to fight. Patent reform in that area can help, but I'd argue that's really just that really fixing the patent system needs to go much, much further. Some think that we can solve problems by simply outlawing software or business method patents entirely, leaving patents limited to actual hardware or physical inventions. Though there are some worries that smart patent attorneys would quickly figure out ways to write their way around such changes. Some, like Professor Mark Lemley, have argued that the U.S. Patent Office needs to start paying attention to the actual law and recognize that functional claiming is not allowed. And in more common language, that means writing broad patents that can claim monopoly rights over entire functions rather than specific narrow inventions should not be allowed. Beyond patent reform in the courts, there have been some really interesting attempts by various companies, especially in Silicon Valley, to try and fight back against patent trolling on their own. Twitter has its Inventor's Patent License, which gives engineers the right to freely license any patent they get, thus blocking those patents from ever being used by trolls. A bunch of companies have gotten together to create a defensive patent license, which is effectively an effort to pool together lots of patents to block trolling attempts. Many of those same companies and some others have also supported a license on transfer network in which they automatically agree that if a patent is later sold to a third party, an automatic license issues to all members of the network. And then other efforts include things like Unified Patents, which is an organization that tries to invalidate all questionable patents in a particular field, such as cloud computing or mobile. And then there are efforts like Neweggs, where they publicly proclaim that they will not settle with patent trolls and then proceed to drag any patent troll through the legal system, thus hopefully scaring off future patent trolls from sending them demand letters in the first place. Life360, a startup social network, recently succeeded in following in Neweggs' footsteps and actually using some of the same lawyers, and even took it one step further, promising to fund the legal defense of any other startup sued by the same patent troll that sued Life360. All of these are interesting attempts at solutions, but let's see if we can come up with some better ones. Once again, we've got Dennis Yang and Hirsch Reddy, and we'll start out by asking Hirsch, do you think the patent system can be saved? And if so, how?
Wow, that's a really tough question to ask a patent attorney because, to some extent, I really hope there'd be a way to save the patent system because that means I have job security. But to some extent, I'll backtrack on this in a second, but to some extent, I think the simplest way if you ignore sort of the political aspect of this, if you ignore the aspect of what could realistically be passed through our legislature, ignoring that completely, the easiest solution would just be to say software is not patentable. Period.
Okay. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
And say, well, the problem with that, which I've heard from lots of people, is that there's nothing defined in patent law. What is a software patent? So how do you define what is a software patent versus a business method patent versus other kinds of patents?
Well, I would definitely extend that software patent thing to business method patents as well. If you say that it's difficult to draw that line, then there's also an equally difficult line to draw today between pure mathematical formulas and algorithms and software patents. But we don't let that stop us from doing software patents. So there will be a sticky problem there, but we will resolve it the same way we resolve other sticky problems in the patent system today, which is to basically, it just pushes the ball.
But you're throwing yourself on the mercy of the courts, which have not been great.
Yeah, but you know what? If you said there was no software patents allowed, there'd be a large number of current patents that would very clearly be invalidated, right? And that would really help things. If you want to talk about a comprehensive solution that's even more unlikely to get passed, you just get rid of patents completely. But that is never going to happen, right? I mean, the pharma industry is very powerful. So here's the thing. Okay, so those are let's just assume that those solutions are not possible. Okay. Because I think we can both agree, having been here in Silicon Valley for a while, that's not going to happen. So how do we solve the problem of the way the patent system is working today with the tools that we have today? So the number one way you do it is by writing great briefs which convince the Supreme Court to make certain tweaks in the law without requiring anything to go through the Congress.
And just also for background, for people who haven't followed this, I'm going to go back a little far here, but like in the early 80s, we set up a separate appeals court that all patent cases went to.
The Federal Circuit.
The Federal Circuit, or CAFC. And for many years, the Supreme Court did not review any patent cases, kind of saying, well, those are sort of mere business problems that don't really interest the Supreme Court, which takes on special cases, and we leave all those to the Federal Circuit. And the Federal Circuit used that opportunity to expand patentable subject matter massively in a variety of different ways with a variety of different cases.
Can we take a segue into sort of the agency problems of why that might happen in a regulatory?
Sure, let's go down that road quickly. Okay. but go ahead.
Yeah. So what I wanted to say about that is, imagine what happens when you create a court that's specifically for one type of subject matter, and the prestige of that court has to do with that subject matter, and the people that go into that court are people that have practiced in that subject matter. Do they have an incentive to reduce the importance of that subject matter in the American regulatory framework or in the economy? No, it's the exact opposite. They want to make it bigger, more important, have more prestigious clients in their courts. I mean, these are just human beings. This is the danger of that. And this will probably segue into your story about why the Supreme Court started.
And then the other part of that is, in two aspects, is that also all of the people that they tend to deal with, right? They're not dealing with the engineers who are actually doing the innovation. They're dealing with the patent attorneys who have an institutional and job keeping bias for expanding this thing. And the other fact of the matter is that one of I may have been the very first chief judge on the Federal Circuit was also a former patent attorney who had helped write the 1956 Patent Act. And so he had every reason in the world for his own personal legacy to sort of expand the system. But so they sort of continued to expand the system and created a whole bunch of the problems that we see today.
And even if we don't have that sort of agency problem stuff, there's also just the question of, like, if you pack a court full of true believers, right? Nobody's going around getting a Mike Masnick onto the court, right? Like, you would never make it. You'd be too much of an extremist.
Yeah,
right?
and
or even Lemley, right? Like Lemley especially. There's no way he gets on that court. I mean, he's an extremist from their point of view.
But this is an important tangent, even if it's a tangent, because people are still actually suggesting this again as a potential solution. And I've heard this before: create specialized courts. So part of the argument that people make is, the reason you have all these problems with the patent system is because the judges don't understand the sort of technological issues, and yet we know what happens when you do that, because that's exactly what we did with the Federal Circuit, and they just kept expanding the patent system. And yet we still hear it now. They're talking about, oh, maybe we should create special judges at the district court level who just handle patent cases, and you're going to get the same thing.
Exactly.
Or in Europe, you have people saying like, oh, maybe we should have a special, patent court that will handle patent cases because they'll understand the technical issues better. And yet we know we've had, 30 years, 35 years of that.
It's a pretty counterintuitive thing that happens in organizations, right? Like, you don't think about those kinds of problems. Actually, I've heard a similar argument against bifurcating the patent system and putting one set of standards for pharma and a separate set of standards for software. And the reason people don't want to do that, or the argument against doing that, is to say that if we did that, then the patent system would quickly split into maybe a much more liberal sort of software patent system and extremely strict and maybe out of hand sort of pharma patent system. And the reason that's kept in balance right now is because these two sets of industries are put into one basket.
Yeah.
And if you think about it the same way, you could get the same kind of problems. And those are, again, like sort of second order effects that you don't think about.
And even, I mean, to that point, that's one of the worries that I have about focusing on software patents, not even, to all the way to the extreme of the pharmaceutical side of things, but there have been a whole bunch of, hardware startups lately, and things like Kickstarter and 3D printing have enabled, a sort of a new world of hardware startups that are going to be facing, and some of them are already facing, many of these same patent issues. And if we just focus on, carving out the software patent part of it, then we're not really, dealing with the true symptoms, the true, or we're just focusing on the symptoms in the software space, but not the true, causes of the problems of the patent system. And so I think it helps to go deeper and look at ways to fix the patent system more deeply. And I'm going to get to my personal suggestion in a second, but I still want to get to the Supreme Court because we started to go down that path. And that was that. So after basically 2 decades of the Federal Circuit expanding patents and everything about patents over and over again, and the Supreme Court basically ignoring it, suddenly, I guess at this point it was about almost 10 years ago, the Supreme Court suddenly got very interested in the Federal Circuit and patents, and has taken a series of cases almost every session having to do with patents, and almost every single one, there are a few exceptions but not many, where the Supreme Court completely smacking down the Federal Circuit and saying you're wrong, and pushing back on some of the extremes that we lived with for 2 decades because of the Federal Circuit.
Or to restate that too, they're pushing back on the expansiveness of what you can patent, how you can use the patents.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, it's fairly incredible because, I mean, there was one, I forget which case it was, but I believe it was one of the ones last year where the Supreme Court ruling, and I think it was, I can't remember which justice it was, but maybe Sotomayor.
Talking about Alice then?
No, not Alice. It was before Alice. And it actually said basically like this, is a fundamental like misreading or misunderstanding of patent law. Like basically suggesting like, if you actually understood the most basic concepts of patent law, you would not do this. It was pretty insulting for the Supreme Court to say that about the Federal Circuit. And the people of the Federal Circuit, the judges on the Federal Circuit are not happy about it. I mean, I've heard them very publicly sort of talk about being, year after year being shamed by the Supreme Court.
And to some extent, if you really think about it, there's not a whole lot. I mean, look, there's lower courts are supposed to obey what the Supreme Court says, but there's enough leeway in what you can do with human language because it's not a very precise device. It's not like writing code. There's always leeway. When a decision is reversed by the Supreme Court, goes back to either a district court or to the Federal Circuit, there's always leeway where you can like make provisions to keep things essentially working the same as they always have, but with some language tweaks essentially, right? Or like just you move things around a little bit, and the end result where the rubber meets the road in Silicon Valley, it's the same as it's always been. And giving you one example of that, Alice was a famous decision from 2014, and in Alice, the Supreme Court very clearly kind of said, like, look, you should not allow patent claims where someone does something in real life and essentially says, hey, this thing that we can do in real life, let's just do it in a computer, essentially. And that is not something that we're going to allow a patent for. And they clearly said that, and yet still just this year, I think the USPTO allowed another patent, which was something along the lines of like, I read in the news, and if I misstate these claims, I'm sorry because I'm doing this from memory, but it was something along the lines of an electronic method of getting permission for somebody's child to go on a trip or something like that, where you like, you ask the parent for permission for the field trip, and then the parent does some kind of a response, and it goes to a server, and then it says that, okay, this kid has permission to go on the trip, something like that, something which you could do in real life, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly, specifically what they said you can't do, right? And so somewhere between the Supreme Court and what the USPTO is actually doing, there's a disconnect. So it's not like the Supreme Court says something and it's the law of the land. Yeah. It's supposed to be the law of the land,
but to be fair, right? So in the wake of the Alice ruling last year, which has been less than a year ago, it has had a huge impact, and certainly a number of courts, both district courts and the circuit court, the federal circuit, have been much more quick to reject patents and to cite the Alice ruling. The Patent Office has been rejecting more patents based on that, though they are still letting some through, and they've been adjusting and sort of trying to figure out where things lay. And the number of patent lawsuits dropped significantly in the second half of last year. So, what is definitely true is that the Supreme Court has had an impact, and the Alice ruling being a big one, but certainly some of the other rulings in the past few years have also had an impact. So there is one argument, and this is an argument that some make pretty strongly, that we should just focus on bringing those kinds of cases, letting the Supreme Court work out things, and hopefully that will patch up the patent system as we go, rather than trying to focus on reform in Congress.
To some extent, maybe that's fair to basically say, I mean, I can understand the argument which basically says, hey, look, if we, there wasn't just Alice, it was also Octane Fitness, right? Which is a great case about when it's appropriate to shift fees from the person bringing a patent case.
That's the one where they completely insulted the federal circuit in Octane. Yeah.
Okay. So in that situation, like if the court makes it very liberal, the situations in which somebody who's defending a patent suit can basically say, hey, you who has brought the patent suit now has to pay for my lawyers. That is obviously a huge disincentive.
And also, just to bring it back around, that's a big part of the patent reform bill that's in Congress, and that's actually because the reform bill in Congress tries to take that even further and basically says if you're bringing a bogus patent lawsuit, that you can shift what's called fee shifting and make the person who the patent holder who brings the case pay the legal fees of the other party. And that's also the factor that killed the bill last year, which came very, very close to getting approved.
Is that the one where the Trial Lawyers Association called in?
The trial lawyers at the last minute, like literally at late in the evening when the bill was basically done and everyone thought it was going through and completely set, there was a phone call apparently, and this has been discussed publicly by many people, from the Trial Lawyers Association saying we don't want anything to do that advances fee shifting and the idea that the losers in a lawsuit should have to.
Well, let's walk through that logic there of why that's the case, because I don't think it'll be readily understandable by everyone. So let's just get to why that the trial lawyers are so defensive about that. In a world in which you cannot recover attorney's fees, somebody is much more likely to bring a lawsuit because he doesn't have the especially if he can find a lawyer that will take it on contingency.
Right, which is another issue, which is that many of the patent trolling lawsuits are what's known as contingency
lawsuits. And contingency lawsuit is a lawsuit which you bring, and you do not have to pay the patent attorney, or sorry, the litigator, because he will take his fees out of whatever he wins.
Right.
And from the lawyer's point of view, don't think that they're doing it for charity. They basically run 10 cases at the same time, and if 5 of them win, then they've made their money for the year, and it's kind of a probability thing.
Or one giant one.
Or one giant one, exactly. You win $1 billion, great. So the thing is when you have fee shifting, those kinds of calculations become difficult for the lawyer, and they become difficult for the client as well, because think about this. Now, right now, if you lose a lawsuit, if there's no fee shifting, you never have to pay anyone any money. You only have the chance of an upside.
Right.
But if you might possibly have to pay for the other person's stuff, then you have to sort of, it's like you actually have to pay the casino. You got to pay the casino.
And
so
There's no risk, right?
There's no risk, but and it also changes the calculation of another part of the equation, which is that many of these patent trolls don't want to litigate anyway, right? They're just sending threat letters, and they want you to pay them off so that they never actually have to go to court. And
people don't litigate against them because even if they win, they don't get anything for it. The most they can get is a dismissal. But
Right.
now, if they can actually
Which
get
costs
their
money
attorneys-
still, right?
So if you can get the attorneys, so it changes the whole equation. So
Yep.
so why is it that the Trial Lawyers Association would be so hell bent on stopping that fee shifting? It's because it will dry up the number of cases that come into their offices.
Yep.
That is why they don't want that.
So how are they able to get that stopped then? They
Well,
made
You
a phone.
call.
They
Are we
made
allowed
a
to
phone
call
call.
out the politicians'
you call
names?
Harry Reid. So
Oh, you said it. You said it.
no, it's the traditionally speaking, the trial lawyers have a very strong connection to the Democratic Party, and Harry Reid in particular, who was the Senate Majority Leader until the Senate shifted from being Democratic majority to a Republican majority. And so this year, that's probably not going to be an issue because they can't just call up someone to block it. They can cause other trouble, but not enough. They don't have enough power to block it. So it was a political thing, completely political thing.
And if you think about it from the unfortunate view of the sort of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
the interests of the lawyers who are defending you in these suits, even the ones who are defending you in these suits, is diametrically opposed to your interests because
Yeah.
they need clients that require defense.
Yep.
So even though they may see these absurd cases and be like, oh, it would be great for my lawyer in this baseless lawsuit for my fees to be paid by the opposing party, in the long term, they're not going to want to fight for that kind of a reform because in the long term, there won't be other clients because
Right.
no one will bring these suits. So it's not like even the lawyers with the intimate details of how flawed the system is, how ridiculous the baseless claims are that are brought in these cases, they just don't. They don't talk about it. You know who talks about it? Mostly the lawyers that talk about it are the in-house counsel,
Right.
Who now don't have it. They don't have any link to a law firm. They can, to some extent, if they've already made money in stock options or whatever, they can actually just. They don't care about their legal relationships, right?
Right.
There's only a few lawyers that are going to actually talk about this and still, firm lawyers are not going to talk about this. You will be crapping on your legal network, right? Like you don't do that. So that network is so important for a lawyer's career in terms of getting into another firm, and you become a pariah if you start talking about these things. So it's so weird because all the lawyers who are working on defense, if you look at their dialogue internally with each other when they're defending a case, they are all about this is ridiculous and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But you can't talk about that kind of case stuff. Well, number one thing is like the confidentiality thing. But
Sure.
even after the case, people don't come out and talk about it. But that's exactly the kind of dialogue that you would need
Right.
To
get the public support behind sort of reforming some of these things.
And you even have, you have crazy cases. I had a discussion with a patent attorney who just does defensive cases. But what he was saying was he knows that these are all ridiculous, but at the same time, he sees the patent troll lawyers making so much money, and he's like, it's really tempting,
Yeah, man.
right? I mean, the system is so obvious and so easy to game that he's just like, it's really tempting to just buy a bunch of patents and just
Yep.
become a patent troll and just make so much money off of it. And
I've been getting offers for exactly that. I mean, I'm never going to get an offer again after this podcast. But, I've written stuff on the internet too. But the money is silly money, right? Like
Yeah.
for that kind of stuff. I mean, from a lawyer's point of view, right? I mean,
Yeah. Which brings up another issue, which is, because of the way the patent system works today, you look at, and there are reports that like the average smartphone or something includes like 200,000 patented things, right? And you think about that and you say, well, what is a reasonable license for any one of those patents or any particular of those patents? And, you would drive the price of a smartphone, to ridiculous levels. And yet, whenever you see a patent suit, they ask for like everything. They ask for huge sums of money that if you added it all up, would be many, many times the actual price of
The phone.
of the phone. Or and that's just one example. And you have these sort of patent thickets in all sorts of areas.
It's basically like, so part of the thing about of why just doing the fee shifting might not be enough, and why getting rid of quote unquote bad patents might not be enough is because for something like a smartphone, I feel like even from an engineer's point of view, there's a huge space of quote unquote valid patents that you could write about something, right? Like actually technically difficult sounding stuff tied to hardware, exactly the kind of stuff that some Eastern District of Texas jury is going to be like, oh man, this is crazy science. Like those kinds of things, you could probably write like 1,000 things, right?
Sure.
And not that those things are, helping sort of phones advance or something like that. It's just somebody sitting in a garage and writing these things, but you could write them, right? And if you look at the kinds of stuff that like patent trolls actually go out and litigate with, some of those things are those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And what you need there to sort of, one of the ways you could get rid of those kinds of patents is something that isn't even discussed in patents, right now, which is having an independent invention defense, right?
Yes. Okay. This is what I was going to get to, and I wanted to make sure we got to it before the end of this podcast. Yes. Go for it, and then I'll sound off on this.
So an independent invention defense is basically saying that if somebody can't prove that you actually essentially looked at their stuff and were inspired by it, if you did it in your own lab with sort of clean room style, with having no access, or in other words, if you guys both developed it simultaneously in time, those kinds of things, you shouldn't be able to prevent someone else from practicing that technology. And we don't have that. But, if you look at other kinds of intellectual property, like something like music, independent
copyright, you do.
You have an independent,
Yeah,
although it doesn't quite work.
No, it doesn't work. There is just a ruling that was kind of a mess
the
on
Pharrell song.
the
right?
blurred lines. But maybe that's another podcast discussion. But so I actually wanted to. So I agree, and actually the independent inventor's defense, I think, is a huge thing that doesn't get enough attention, and I think really should. But I actually think would be really interesting to take it even further, which is, in today's patent system, under the law today, it's very, very clear that you are only supposed to get a patent on an invention that is both non-obvious to those who are skilled in the art, and something that's new, right? And so that non-obvious to someone who is skilled in the art
Never even comes into play.
never even comes into play, right?
impossible to judge
Well,
it.
no. But here's the thing, right? So everyone focuses on the new part, right? So they always look for prior art because prior art can answer the new question. But the non-obvious one, no one ever discusses that. I think an independent invention by others in the space is evidence that it is obvious to those skilled in the art because multiple people are inventing it. And so
Lemley said something like that, right? Yeah.
I don't know if he did or not, but he should,
It's
right? And
very common sense.
I think that someone potentially could make a really strong case, if we could find the good case, that rather than just using independent invention as a defense, which right now is not allowed, use independent invention as
prima facie showing
proof of obviousness. And I think that would be a really, really interesting way. And then I actually think that would solve a huge number of problems with the patent system, because then you have then the case that everyone worries about, the sort of classic thing that people think about with the patent system of somebody taking something and copying it. That situation is still covered by the patent system. It only goes away for the cases where someone is coming up with something on their own completely and innovating on their own. And so I
love that.
a huge proponent.
And I think
of that.
that's like the most frustrating case of a patent suit, right? That it's like, no, it's like I didn't look at this patent at all. I came up with it on my own.
Exactly.
And even beyond that, like this patent has nothing to do with really what I'm doing. It just sort of touches on something.
Exactly. The podcast patent would not survive
Right.
the independent invention thing. So that's great, and you wonder why it doesn't come up. And I have no answer for that. Like,
I mean, is the answer with like what you said? Someone needs to find a case that.
Yeah, I think someone would need to really
Is
test
a good
that. But
example of it,
part of the problem is it's
like, how do you see? The thing is, one case of independent invention would not be enough. Obviously, that wouldn't be enough. You would need a family of those cases.
Yeah.
And I think only now do we have the technology to kind of mine large amounts of source code, like in places like GitHub, to find multiple instances of some kind of a technique.
I mean, is there like a log or like, chilling effects is kind of the thing on the DMCA side. Is there something where is someone keeping track of all of these
No.
these patents? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, well, somewhat. There is someone, actually, EFF did set up something called trolling effects,
Okay.
which is like chilling effects, so it's a little more limited, but that's really just focused on patent troll demand letters,
Right.
not necessarily patent troll lawsuits.
I mean, but as a lawyer, I'm going to tell you, people don't go out there once they get a demand letter and like let the whole world and investors know, oh my
Right.
God, we got a demand letter. People,
But maybe they
people-
should, right? Like
Yeah,
that seems like
which was the point of trolling effects, which
Yeah.
is because you had that problem where nobody knew that everybody else was getting
Yeah.
these demand letters, and so they couldn't sort of team up to fight back. So
Right.
the hope was to generate interest in that. I don't know if it's worked.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully more stories like the Life 360 thing will kind of
Yeah.
embolden companies to talk out. You know?
that takes balls, and that guy should
Yeah.
get a medal for doing that. I mean, if people don't know the background of it, basically, it's like a relatively small company. It's not small. They had some,
Yeah.
they had some investment. I don't know, like
A fair
10 mil
amount.
or something like that.
I think it was 40 million.
40 mil.
Yeah,
Okay,
they
so
actually
you
had a
can
fair
you can actually fight a patent case when you get 40 mil. When you have 40 mil, you can fight the case so strongly that other people don't want to come after you. But if you don't have 40 mil, if you have $1 or $2 million or even just $5, you can't do that.
Well, you can though. I mean, so like, what's his name? Drew Curtis.
Yeah, with FARC,
At
yeah.
FARC, he got sued for patent infringement, and he's just like a one-man shop, and
But is he a rich one, man?
he's not that rich, but he
but
it's
he has a large platform with which to
and he was
to
very,
shout.
very vocal about it.
Yeah.
And
Or Adam Carolla, I guess, did the same thing.
yeah, and a few others. But in both of those cases, they did, both Adam Carolla and Drew at FARC, they did settle, but
I wish Adam Carolla didn't. I mean, it would have been
yeah.
much more cool if he was like, with his personality, he was
we're
like,
going
take it to
this
the bag.
yeah. But at least with FARC, I mean, he did the deal that that he wouldn't allow a gag order on the settlement, so he got to say
talk
what the
about it.
settlement was, which was he didn't pay a damn thing, because most of them do have gag orders, so they can't even say it. And he was very, very vocal and public about it. And so I think others, are being inspired to do those kinds of things. And so I'm hopeful that we'll see more and more activity of that. And I like the Life 360 thing, also saying that he'll pay for others who are sued by that same troll, because then you can wipe out a single troll in one shot. But anyways, these are ideas to work on. I think we have a lot more to talk about, but we're also pretty much out of time. So once again, another interesting conversation. I think we're going to have another week, maybe not next week, but we'll have some more discussions on patents and patent trolling and patent solutions and all of that kind of thing. But once again, thank you very much for listening, and thank you guys for joining us again.
Thank you.
Sing it with me.